Welcome to the Creative Spaces Podcast. This is Kevin Booth and Rob Wenner. In today's episode, we're talking to recording industry veteran and all-around awesome audio person, Russ Long.
Acoustics 101, which my contractor was so excited to have a book about acoustics, so he actually printed the whole thing out, put it in a binder, printed out a second one so I would have one in a binder, and we followed it to a T, and it couldn't have been a better result in the end. It's a joy to be in the room, and it's just so funny to me that my wife goes to bed early one night. She's like, "You gonna watch TV?" I'm like, "No, I think I'll go in the studio and work a little," and it's just, I love to be working in the studio. If I was the only one at home, I'll just work out there all the time because it's just a pleasure to sit in there and work.
Originally from Colorado, Russ moved to Nashville in the mid-'80s to attend Belmont University and went on to engineer the hits Kiss Me and There She Goes by Sixpence None The Richer. He has recorded and mixed albums by Wilco, Dolly, Parton, and Amy Grant. Russ's film credits include the soundtracks to The Sapphires, Girl Interrupted, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and The Pirates Who Don't Do Anything. Russ is also an engineer for live sound recordings, having multi-tracked live performances for Switchfoot, Luke Bryan, and Guy Clark, and has worked on numerous live events including the K-Love Music Awards, Challenge America Musical Gala at the Kennedy Center, Barbara Bush's 90th birthday concert featuring Reba McEntire, as well as the Grammy and CMA Awards. He's written 150 articles for Pro Audio Review, Pro Sound News, and Mix Magazine. Russ joined Yamaha's R&D team in October 2018, where his primary focus is large format console development. Russ works in his private mix room, Dangerland, just outside of Nashville, where he joins us today. Russ, hello. Thank you for joining us today.
Wow, thanks for that introduction. Thanks for having me too.
Hi, Russ.
Yeah, well, you've done a lot of work. It's impressive.
Guess that means I'm old.
And accomplished and seasoned. There's a lot to learn here, I think. And first off, how did you get started? What led you to audio in the first place?
Well, it's an interesting path because I came to Nashville, I think, with ambitions of being a drummer originally. And like so many people in the kind of behind the scenes field, they had a music, they played an instrument or had some kind of desire to be on stage originally. And I came from originally from Boulder, and then I went to middle school and high school in Grand Junction, Colorado, a smaller town, and felt like a pretty good drummer in that small town. And other people in the town thought I was a great drummer as well. But all of a sudden I end up in Nashville, and I'm surrounded by people who were the best drummer in their small town. And I fell in pretty close to the bottom. So it wasn't quite as good as I had hoped. But also I got to play drums on a couple of independent recordings early on, and small custom records. And I remember being in the studio and just playing big and powerful, and I couldn't wait to get a copy of this thing when it's done. And then a couple of months later, somebody sends me the cassette that it came out on. A lot of those indie records in those days were cassette only. And I put the thing in, and the drums sounded all small and anemic. And it's like, what in the world happened? I know I was playing big and powerful. And I started to realize that, the drummer really doesn't have any control of how those drums sound. It's somebody else that shapes the sonic texture of a recording, and not just the drums, but every element of it. So I quickly became more interested in being the guy that made the drums sound great than the guy that actually played them.
Cool.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of drummers really excel in this field, and drums are arguably the most important or very important and difficult to record and difficult to capture, right?
Yeah. I think so. And especially because, you can learn so much other stuff in a small bedroom studio, but generally you need a real studio to be able to record a drum set, a full drum kit and everything.
Right. Yeah.
And so drummers make great, I should say too, drummers make great engineers because, or at least it's not as important now, but back in the day of tape machines, and you had to, know exactly when to punch in. And depending on what tape machine you were on, sometimes you had to push the beat quite a bit, or sometimes, if you're on a Studer, it punched pretty quick, but if you're on an MCI, it punched pretty slow. And you knowing and having a feel for the rhythm really affected how good of an engineer you were.
Yeah, identify tempo, right? And be able to identify tempo, whether it's increasing as it should or not increasing, and playing with a click. Yeah, I've seen drummers really do well with that, getting another drummer to perform a song as well as getting it to sound good. So what happened after that?
Well, I finished up school, and by that point, I was already set on being an engineer. And Belmont, I mean, they've got a pretty complex music business program that has a whole focus on engineering and everything now. But at that point, it was more of it was a music business degree that I got. I mean, it was a Bachelor of Business Administration with music business emphasis, and that basically meant that I took all the business classes that you needed for a business degree, but then my electives could all be either directed towards the music business or in recording. And we had a studio in the school, and I took all the recording classes, and students were able to book the studio during off hours. So we would book the studio from projects. If you had a class project, that would end at I think 10 or 11 p.m. is how long those went, and you could book nighttime sessions. So we'd go home after dinner, sleep from 7 to 10 or 11, and then have a nighttime session, go in the studio at midnight and work till 6 or 7 in the morning, and have to have it all cleaned up when the first class came in at 8, and really learned about recording, working in the middle of the night in the studio during college, and was somehow already making enough money to stay alive when I graduated. And I had never really been drawn to the music of Nashville, and I think that's changed now. I love the music scene in Nashville, and the music scene's changed here now too.
It's incredible, yeah, it's
definitely.
But my aspirations were to go to either New York or LA, and that was my plan. I'm going to graduate from school and go to one of those places. But since I was already making a living, I just decided, you know what, I'll give Nashville a shot, and maybe stay here for a couple years, and man, the longer I stayed, the more I liked it. And you start building relationships with singer-songwriters. I was doing all publishing demos early on, which still a lot of those used some of the best session guys and stuff, but they were just demos that people were using to get their songs cut, and really got myself off the ground doing that.
Now it's like the place to go. It's number one for recording if you're recording live.
Yeah, there's not another city that has as much. I mean, you could get orchestral work maybe in LA and some of the other cities, but as far as band stuff, there's no city that makes live music as much as or as well as Nashville does.
Yeah, that's great. And then, so when you were in college, you had support from your family on your career path?
I did, because I was getting that business degree, which I think was what made my parents. I mean, if I was going to a trade school or something like that, I don't think I would have had that same experience. I mean, the same support. But the fact that, and I don't think, I mean, my parents were positive, but I don't think they thought this was going to work. But I think they were like, all right, knowing that, well, he's got a business degree, he can always go get a job at IBM or whatever, working in the corporate end of things if needed. And and even for multiple years after I was out of school, my mom would be like, so you think you want to maybe come home and spend some time here and while you're looking for a job? I was like, Mom, I'm working. I'm kind of doing my thing already. And she's like, well, at some point you're going to get a job, right? And I said, well, this is what I'm doing.
This is a job, And the business degree really helps because you're an independent owner. You're an owner operator from day one.
Yeah, it's crazy how important the business is, and especially because so many creatives, I don't think, are natural business people. So it's good to learn that stuff.
Sure.
And we've all known guys who are great musicians who've made tons of money at certain points in their life, but are completely broke because they've done such a terrible job of managing their personal business.
Right.
And I can't say anything. I mean, and you don't naturally learn business where, I mean, a great musician, I mean, it's great if he gets a college degree in music performance or whatever, but chances are if he's a great musician, he can be a great musician without even studying it in school, And whether you would, I mean, maybe there's some exceptions, like if you're going to be a symphony player or something like that. But as far as playing in a rock band or being a session musician, there's no differential between the guys who went to college and the guys who didn't.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
definitely.
So they were looking for you to identify a backup plan. You didn't have one. You're like,
no. I mean, I guess I did the fact that I could have went and applied for a job, like I said, that required a business degree. But I didn't really have a backup plan. I mean, I was doing it.
Yeah. Is there anyone throughout that period that you started to admire, kind of modeled yourself after? If I'm gonna, do this, this is who I want to work like, be like.
Um, well, yeah, there were a lot of people. I mean, there was never one specific person that took me under their wing or whatever. But um, there was a guy named Lynn Peterzell who was a great engineer in town, and for some reason he took a liking to me and gave me a lot of work. I mean, pointed me to a lot of people, and my only real studio job ever was at a studio called House of David, working for David Briggs, and he got me that, and he hooked me up with a lot of singer songwriters, and sadly he had a heart attack and passed away while mixing a Dolly Parton record. I mean, had a heart attack over the console,
Seriously,
and which also taught me about needing to take breaks and not working yourself to death, because he was definitely, I mean, he was amazing, but he also never stopped, And I didn't know him super well, but I mean, he really helped me a lot, which was great. And there were a lot of engineers. That was the thing I loved about Nashville is I think people everybody felt like they were helping each other.
Right.
I mean, I had guys that I went to college with, Steve Beischer or Joe Baldridge. I mean, John Painter, who's more of a musician than an engineer, but is also an engineer. But these guys, I mean, it wasn't competitive like they were trying to get your gig. They were like happy when they could throw something your way that they couldn't do or whatever.
Right.
So it was a positive work environment in Nashville.
Yeah, I think that's very unique to Nashville compared to like Los Angeles or New York. Very much more competitive, and I'll say the word cutthroat, but when I moved to Nashville, I immediately noticed that people were not out to get your gig; they were there to help you out, and it was great.
I mean, I think it's. Yeah, I think it's just a kind of the relaxed vibe, and people thinking what goes around comes around. And if I treat somebody well, they'll treat me well in return. And I mean, I even remember I worked for this guy Mike Lawler, who was a keyboard player, and he had a songwriter, and I was his keyboard tech, and also engineered all this stuff in his home studio, his songs he wrote and everything. And he told me, I remember Cartage coming to pick up his gear to take him to pack up his gear to take to a session, and he was always really nice to the Cartage guys. And the guy left, and he goes, "You always want to be nice to everybody in the business because you never know when they're going to be hiring you." And it's true. I mean, it's like the guy may be hauling your gear around today, but tomorrow he may be producing the next hit single, and if he likes you, he may be hiring you to mix it. And it's just where we are. It changes. I mean, maybe short term it's not that way, but if you really want a career in this industry, it's all about relationships, and people remember things. And if you treat somebody right, I mean, that was one thing that in doing this so long, I've had a lot of interns over the years, and many of them have hired me to mix projects that they were producing down the road or something like that. And I always thought that was a real honor. Because it just showed that they valued the way because they saw how I worked and the way I approached things when there was no producer around or no artist around or how I did things on my private time. And they respected that enough and thought highly about what I did enough to hire me when it came time for them to hire somebody to mix something they were working on,
Yeah, there's easily a dozen people that can do the same job. It's, does this person have the same values, work ethic, and just easy to get along with.
Right.
Value is kind of important. You put a lot of trust with a lot of gear and value and expense and careers, and the artist career is at stake, right?
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing is you always have to give something your best. And there might be something that's a real low budget thing, or for whatever reason you do something, on spec, you're not getting paid anything initially, or what. It doesn't matter what the situation is. If I'm doing it, I'm giving you 100%. I'm approaching it with the same attitude and work ethic as if it's full rate, full blown major label price, or if whatever the cheapest indie thing that I ever do, and I'm going to give you the exact same quality of work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The gear is tools, right? And that's our toolbox. Although all of us in industry have what we call GAS, right? Gear acquisition syndrome. You get really fixated on the gear, because it's cool. sometimes it's cool and it sounds amazing and you need it, right? But you've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different studios, live venues, and including your own studio. Um, what in your space or what piece of gear, software, or part of your setup inspires you?
Well, I mean, there's a handful of things. I really, I mean, microphones to me are just an amazing tool, and I love that you can really shape the tone of a sound depending on which microphone you choose. And I mean, some of the engineers that were, I mean, I remember at AES here in early when I was just getting started, I'd go to the AES show and hear these engineers talk, and whether it was Bruce Swedeen or Steve Albini or even producers like George Martin or whatever talk about mic selection and how that affected recordings, and I just became very drawn to mics, and I'm a huge lover of ribbon mics, and ironically, John Jennings has become a good friend of mine, who's the one of the people who started Royer Labs, and I did the first review on the R121, their first ribbon mic, and I actually got to use that on that Sixpence. We did that whole record before the Royer came out, and then John gave me the mic to review, and then that song "There She Goes" was added to the record later, so I used that on the record a lot, and like the cello on there is all Royer R121,
really?
and it's just so that mic to me, I mean, and it's just an amazing mic, and it was the first time I was able to use a ribbon on a loud guitar cabinet, and I had Cole's ribbons before that, which sounded amazing, but it was always like, I got to figure out how to get this, and I would, put the thing way off axis or put it back from a guitar cabinet, because it captured, even when it wasn't in the best position, it still captured guitar in an amazing way. So it was like, I got to figure out a way to make this work, because I want the sound of a ribbon on the guitar, even though, and whatever, I blow multiple ribbons and stuff too as time goes by. But the Royer, all of a sudden, it's like, here's
delicate.
That ribbon sound, but I can throw it right up in front of the guitar cabinet and not have to worry, So that's one of my. I mean, I've got multiple mics that I just love. I mean, I've got a Sony C800G that I'm particularly fond of, and I just think it just does. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're recording vocals or acoustic guitar or piano or whatever. They sound phenomenal,
I've heard that
Ocean Way. They've got you can use it for overheads because they got multiple models of them, and I mean, they're great.
Yeah, I've heard that mic take it like an average singer and make them sound like they have a lot of tone. It just pulls a lot out of their voice.
It's stunning at what it can do.
That's interesting. And mic selection has probably changed a bit over the years too. Well, what works with what we record with now, the medium and how we record now versus.
Well, very much so. I mean, like, because the ribbon mics, which people love ribbons now, but ribbons are so slow gain, you usually have to crank the preamp up quite a bit, and you get more preamp noise.
Yep.
And that was sometimes it was difficult to use ribbons when you were using tape machines, because
you already had a noise floor.
You already had noise from tape, and you really made a lot of your other selections to keep noise down because you already had this bass noise that was on every single track. But all of a sudden, when digital comes into fashion, which I think my first draw, I mean, I guess I had D88s for a long time, but Radar was the first thing that felt truly pro to me that was digital. But it was like, wow, I can use these ribbon mics, and the noise is no longer an issue because the Radar converters sounded fantastic, and the and it was quiet as can be.
Because the way the ribbon moves and the way a sound wave propagates, just like a wave, depending on the frequency, it could be a different wavelength. I think it responds to that wave and reproduces it in an authentic way. Not that other mics aren't authentic, but that is what we're trying to do, is trying to capture things in an authentic way.
Right. No, that's very much true. And the other interesting thing to me about ribbons, like a lot of these condenser mics, especially newer ones that are lower priced, you throw the thing up flat and it sounds pretty good. It's like, oh, this is great. I only got to tweak it a little bit to get where I need to go. But for whatever reason, because of the circuit or I'm not sure if it's the diaphragm or what it is, but a lot of these mics don't take to EQ very well. And even though it sounds pretty close flat, you really have a hard time getting it to where you want it to be.
Really?
And a ribbon, on the other hand, where it a lot of times, because of the high frequency roll off, it sounds a little duller or something initially, but you can do radical, drastic EQ on a ribbon, and it still sounds natural and doesn't
without it
start
harsh.
to get these phase issues that sound kind of, that just don't sound natural or whatever. It still sounds real natural, even with some drastic EQ. And I always loved and I used the 4038, the Coles ribbons, tons too, and always paired them with the GML EQ because I thought that EQ complemented them perfectly, and I could go as extreme as I wanted, and it never caused any issues at all.
Wow.
Are there certain mic preamps that you like to use with ribbon mics?
I don't know if I'm not dead set on a certain mic pre. I've got these Gordon mic pre's that sound fantastic that I use a lot, but I've also got a couple of the AEA mic pre's that are designed for ribbon mics that sound great on them. But I'm not always gravitating to a certain pre. It just depends on they work well with most. Well, as long as you got enough gain, they'll generally work fine.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, like the ribbon has such a signature sound on its own that the preamp type, whether iron or tube or really comes down to the gain that you need, not so much the character, right?
Yeah, but I should say, you know what? I say they work well with most. They work well with most of my pre's, but there are. The impedance matters too, and if you get really cheap pre's, they don't necessarily work as well. So, it's not going to be completely flat across the board. But I'm just thinking through my selection of studio pre's, and I don't have one that I got to use the ribbon with this pre. But I do know I've ran into a lot of pre's in other places where they don't necessarily work, which I think is more of an impedance issue than anything else.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What year was it that you worked with Eric Smith on designing your room, Dangerland, and working on that studio? And how long did it take?
Well, we started. I had been talking with him for a few years before we finally started, and I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had a studio called the Carport, which was built into a garage, which I would have called the Garage, but there was already a studio in Nashville called the Garage, so I just decided to call it the Carport instead.
We're not the Garage, but we are a carport. We still protect the car.
So that I had built in the, I think in 94, which was really early on for home studios that you could actually do a record in, there was no, anytime I worked there, I was never competing against another home studio. It was always, I can do this for less than you could do it in a regular commercial space or whatever. And that was my competition, was always a commercial space. And labels were very hesitant to want anything done in a home studio because they were scared. Well, home studio, they thought, cassette 4-track or 8-track 1/4 inch or whatever. They weren't thinking at that point pro studio. But I had built that, and it became kind of a home base for me to do overdubs in and do some mixing in, lower budget mixing in them. And I loved the idea of the home studio. That worked really well for my workflow. Some guys don't like having a studio in their home, but and it was a separate building, so it kind of felt like I was going to work, even though it was where even though it was where I lived. I could kind of keep work and home separate. And then after our first son was born, which was in 2000, our house became very small very fast. I didn't know we had a 1,000 square foot house, and no one told me that there is like 350 square feet of crib, swing, playpen, carpet thing, and all this. It is just like, what in the world? The house just got half the size. And
and then baby gates to hurl over every day.
It's just insane really quick. So, and I had spent money on a studio at that point. So, so we ended up moving, and I was able to work it out where I kept the studio and I rented the house out, and the tenants just knew that, hey, there's a guy that owns the house that comes and goes at any hour. But that's okay because we have more privacy than we would if we were in an apartment, but and it all worked out fine. And I lived pretty close by for about 10 years. And then I have 3 kids, and we're looking at schools and all these other issues come into fact. So it's like, well, we're going to move out of town and go down to Williamson County, where the kids can ride their bike in the street and we don't have to worry about them getting ran over. And and there's a yard where they can run around and play and all this. It's all driven by family. It's crazy. All these these music and technical decisions.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's
but
right.
Well, under the hood, everybody has a family and they have a life, and
that's right.
Plays a part. Yeah.
So and I'm still making the commute back to the carport, my old studio, which at that point was about a 20-minute drive each way or whatever. And it was getting to be a little bit of a pain sometimes because I was trying to always have dinner with the whole family, but a lot of times I wasn't done with my work at dinner time. So I'd have to drive back and it's like, this is a headache. And then Nashville just starts booming and growing like crazy. And all of a sudden that 20-minute drive is sometimes a 45-minute drive, depending on traffic. And it is really hard to get work done when you're driving that much every day.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided we just got to get this studio thing done. So, and I guess we finished it 4.5 years ago.
I think that's right.
I think it was 4.5 years ago or so. Yeah. So, I mean, I started talking to Eric seriously a couple years, 2 or 3 years before that, and just different approaches. And the thing that was not the thing, because there's so many things great about Eric, but he also thinks in like he always knew like, well, you know what, you want to do this because this will allow you to resell down the road if you want to sell it, and it needs this and this to still be considered a bedroom, or you need to have a window, or you need to have all this stuff. So it was really great coming up with the design. And so I've got a control room, and then I've got a recording space as well. It's just one room, but that's also our guest room. And I've got a Murphy bed in that room. So the Murphy bed folds out and it's a guest room, and you fold the Murphy bed up, and I've got a panel on the wall and I can record in there if needed or whatever too. Right. And so it's really flexible space. And the control room is far away from the rest of the house. It's connected to the house, but it feels like I'm going to work still. So it's not in the basement. I mean, my kids and wife do not hear it. If I could be playing things as loud as they go and they don't hear it in the house. So, in any of the house, but definitely not the bedrooms.
You guys worked on the sound isolation piece of it.
Yeah. And the placement of where it is in regards to the house. So, but and Eric, we floated the floor. We did all of course, Eric wrote Acoustics 101, which, my contractor was so excited to have a book about acoustics. So he actually printed the whole thing out, put it in a binder, printed out a second one, so I would have one in a binder, and we followed it to a T, and it couldn't have been a better result in the end.
Yeah, I used that too a long time ago with a couple of friends building home studios around that same time period in the early 2000s, and it was great reference material. And you always seem to always cut corners based on budget or things like that, and then you learn the hard way why that's important and why you shouldn't cut those corners in terms of isolation and floating the floor. I was listening to the other podcast you were on, which was Recording Studio Rockstars.
Oh, yeah, that I was interviewed for.
Yeah, you discussed this a little bit. You talked about the floating floor and how that changed, that combined with bass trapping, the low-end extension in the room.
Yeah, because it's not a tiny room, but it's smaller than an average control room. And your initial thought, I think, if you saw the dimensions, would be the low end's not going to be as accurate or as extended as what you would expect by the dimensions. But it sounds great in the room. I mean, it is just, I've not had a better mixing experience in them. And the consistency is unbelievable. I mean, my other spot was great, and I got to where I could work around it, but everything I did, I still referenced it in the car. And I'm completely comfortable doing mixes without referencing them anywhere else in the room. I mean, I listen to them. I mostly work on one set of monitors. I've got 2 other sets of monitors that I reference on a little bit, and I listen on headphones just a little bit. But I mean, it's 90% of it is one set of monitors in the room. Yeah. It sounds amazing, and it doesn't just sound great, it sounds accurate. So I know what I've got. I can walk out of here and have no problem at all sending it out. And most spaces you work, even if they're great, you have to listen in multiple places before you're comfortable, before I'm going to send it to somebody, because I'm nervous about it, but I'm not nervous about it here.
That's great. Yeah, Eric has always emphasized the how sound isolation does that job, isolating sound, keeping sound from escaping or entering the room, and that's important. But also lends to the sound of the interior of the room, especially across the low end, right? So low end frequencies are big, long sound waves, and they want to do their job, which is to complete their cycles, you know, and that's why you need bass trapping. But then the floated floor and the insulation, extra insulation in the wall for the isolation is also an absorber of those lower extended frequencies that try to either escape or stay within the room. And staying within the room, of course, is the bad part for the mixing side of things.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's stunningly quiet too. It's just so funny to me that like I've got hard drives that have no fan that you wouldn't even hear in most rooms, and they seem noisy in here because the room is so quiet. It's fantastic, you know?
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
The fanless fans.
I would say you have to set the table for success, right? And then so the internal treatment is better set up to do its job, treating reflections in the room, and then that sets up success and hopefully creativity for you in the room, you know, because you don't have these things in your way.
It's I mean, it's a joy to be in the room, and it's just so funny to me that you know, if my wife goes to bed early one night, she's like, "You gonna watch TV?" I'm like, "No, I think I'll go in the studio and work a little." And it's just, I mean, I love to be working in the studio. If I was the only one at home, I'll just work out there all the time, because it's just a pleasure to sit in there and work, you know, And what a crazy thing that I've been doing this for over 30 years or whatever it is, 35 years, I don't know, forever. And I still love doing it. And it's still, I mean, I can't wait to, you know, I get a new thing to mix and I can't wait to get to work on it. And it's just, I love doing it. And I would have never dreamed. I mean, when I first started, even though I loved it then, I really thought that this is something I'll do till I'm probably 30. And then I'll probably need to move on and do something else, because I couldn't imagine loving anything for a lifetime, I don't think. And I just feel so blessed that it's such a great field, you know?
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's the goal. It should be the goal. We should all just do what we love and find a way to get paid for it.
Yeah.
Sounds easy.
Are there any particular projects you're working on right now you want to mention, or?
Yeah, I'm doing, Sandra McCracken is a, kind of a folk, gospel folk artist, I would call her. I don't know, singer-songwriter. And I have worked on her records on and on. I mean, she's worked with tons of different people over the years, but I've worked on, I don't know if it's half but I mean, I've probably worked on 10 records of hers over the last 25 years. And she's just recorded another record a month or two ago. And I'm in the process of mixing it now. I think I'm 3 songs in, and it's fantastic. And she is
awesome.
It's very inspiring to me. And it's, and I've worked on a lot of this, what's called CCM, contemporary Christian music. And a lot of it feels really canned and is not very inspiring. And this is like polar opposite. It's just fantastic music and cool. Very amazing lyrics. And it's just, I couldn't work on anything, anything better. And she loves being creative, and she's not trying to second guess radio or anything like that. She just wants it to be great. And which I love that kind of thing too. And there's a guy named Seth Talley, who's a producer engineer who I've gotten to know. And he, which I didn't even realize it, I don't think until about a year ago, but he is also a songwriter. And he decided, after producing and engineering for however long, he wanted to make a record. And he asked me to mix the record for him, which it's just an EP, I think. It's just a few songs, but we just finished the second song. And it's great, and he's really good, and it's really an honor and he's a great engineer, and I think it's just a real honor when an engineer asks you to work on their stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can understand it, because you get so engulfed in something and can start to lose perspective, because he's produced it, he's engineered it, and it's his songs too and stuff. So he just wants a new perspective. But it's great stuff, and I've really enjoyed working on that.
Yeah, there's some people who like are the artist and produce and record and maybe even mix, maybe not mix, maybe there's no, but I'm always impressed by that, how they could have objectivity in that, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing, and
Yeah.
it doesn't happen as much anymore. But back in the day, in the '90s and stuff, it was routine to get booked. I mean, one engineer would record the whole project, and you do it in a studio, and I'd get booked for 6 weeks. I mean, somebody would say, "Are you available to start on something June 15th?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." And they go, "Okay, it'll go to the end of July or whatever." And basically, you work 5 or 6 days a week for a
Mhm.
month and a half, and that was just what it was. And uh, and there were times I worked on some of those records where I remember talking through the producer and thinking that I've lost perspective. I do think it would be great if we got somebody else
Yeah.
to mix it, which
Right.
and if I got to speak into that, it was always great to because of course, as an engineer, there's many people I'm a big fan of, but there's also people I'm not a fan of. So I didn't want somebody that I thought was going to screw it up to mix it. But I've had Bob Clearmountain and Tom Lord-Alge and Shane Wilson, and I mean some of these great engineers mixed things that I recorded, and always did stunning job, and I always thought did stuff that brought something to it that I wouldn't necessarily have done. So it was an honor to have them work on things that I had been involved in.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, once it's tracked, you can go a lot of different directions, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how much tracked and how much is there. Tell us about your work with Yamaha. You're working on large format consoles and layout for that, or?
Yeah. So interesting enough. So I kind of have always done a little bit of live sound too, and that worked hand in hand with the studio. And it would, early on when I started doing a lot of song demos and those kind of things, I'd be in the studio with a singer-songwriter, and they would be like, "Man, you understand my sound so much. I'm playing at the Bluebird on Friday. Any chance you'd come down and mix my set or whatever, and that was always great to me. So yeah, I'd love to do that or whatever. So I started doing some live sound in between things, almost always with people that I worked with in the studio, and then I ended up going on the road with some of these people, and it was interesting because there's a pretty broad line between you're a studio person or you're a live person.
Yeah.
More so in those days.
Yeah.
I think so. I just never talked about the live stuff very much because I just didn't want anybody to
pigeonhole you
quit
as a
calling
live
me
guy.
to do studio.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But it was a pretty good. And I remember Jerry Mcpherson, who's a guitar player who's phenomenal, one of the best guitar players I've ever worked with. And he played on tons of records, one of the busiest guys in town, but also did quite a bit of live stuff. And he told me, and I was on the road with something with him, and he just said, "Man, these guys, they lay in their bunks all the time." This is before cell phones. He's like, every time we stopped to fuel, he was off the bus at the payphone, checked his messages, returned all the calls. If somebody called him for a session, he's like, "Sorry, I can't do it today or tomorrow. I'm booked. I can do it Friday or whatever," and just maintained contact with everybody and was completely able to maintain these two parallel universe careers, So
wow.
That's just what I did, and I never did any of that touring where I was gone for 2 months or anything. It was always, occasionally I might have went out for a couple of weeks, but usually it was just long weekends or something like that. So I was able to juggle it pretty well.
Cool.
So I had a pretty good grasp of live as well, and I got to be friends. I think it was probably late '90s with or early 2000s with an engineer in Nashville named Chris Taylor, who is a legend in the live world.
Yeah.
He's like the Bob Clearmountain or Elliot Shiner of the studio world, but he's that to the live. And he toured with Barbara Streisand,
Earth, Wind and Fire.
Tons and tons of acts. Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Joe Cocker did that. He did the broadcast mix for that Garth Brooks Live in Central Park show that had over 1 million people or whatever. Was just great live engineer. And we got to be friends a little bit. And he was just I couldn't believe how kind of a guy he was. These people, it seems like and not necessarily true in the artist world, but in the engineering technical world, it seems like the better somebody is, the kinder they are so often. And that was true. I mean, it's like, I remember first time I met Michael Wagner, who, Ozzy Osbourne, Motley Crue, Skid Row, all these bands he did. And I'm like, this guy's going to be pretty edgy or whatever. And it's like, what in the world? The kindest guy you've ever met, and so willing to share information and help with things. And I mean, just one of the greatest people ever. And that's how Chris was. And then he left. His son was going into high school, and he didn't want to be, and he did these tours where he was gone 6 months at a time or 8 months at a time and was just gone forever. And his son was going into high school. He wanted to be in his life, make sure he was around all the time. So he left the road, and Yamaha offered him a job, and he went to do console development for Yamaha R&D work. And so over the years, he started to bring me in on some of the tests they do, which there's all kinds of tests. It might be a listening test to listen to a couple of different EQs that they're looking at implementing in a console, or it might be looking at a piece of a foam board with knobs drawn in different places to talk about the layout. Is this comfortable for you? And it's like, nope, I make this adjustment all the time. I don't want to have to reach that far to make that. That should be close. But this thing here, I don't hardly ever touch that. Put that somewhere farther away. And, that kind of thing, or listening to different compressors and a lot of different type of evaluation work. But every year or so, he would bring me in, and I was so intrigued by that. And then a console would come out, and I would see how something I had said affected that console. And that just was like, man, that's awesome. And I told him, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, I was like, I don't know if these kind of jobs open ever, or if you're ever looking at leaving, but if you leave this is a job I think I would actually like. And I'd never even thought of having a job before, but,
right.
And so he called me, whatever it was.
A real job.
Yeah, a real job. I mean, so he called me 3.5 years ago and said, man, I'm retiring. If you're serious about this, I'll point you in the right direction, and you see what happens. So I thought, well, I don't have anything to lose. I'll pursue it. And I felt like, I mean, from being self-employed for so long, I really felt like I am unhireable. There is no way any company would be interested in hiring somebody who is so set in their ways and has been independent for so long. I didn't think I had a chance.
They're like, Russ, we start at 9:00. We're well, I have coffee, and when I feel like I'm done having the coffee, I go to work.
Or I'm happy to start at 9 if I'm go to bed early, but if I'm up late, I may not be ready till noon. Or I mean, it's just a crazy thing. But so I apply, I interview, and all this stuff, and next thing I know, they offer me the job, and it's a full-time job, but I stay in Nashville, so I'm considered a remote employee. So I still get quite a bit of flexibility in my hours, and I deal with California a lot because that's where Yamaha's U.S. office is. So they are starting 2 hours later, so it works better with the schedule. And I have lots of calls with Japan. And because of the way their schedule is, those are always evening calls for me, usually at 6:00 or 7:00. And I've got a couple of those a week. My first year with them, I went to Japan 4 times to be involved in stuff over there. And then we stopped for COVID, but I'll start traveling there again next year. But they are, and so I am both involved in the development of new products, and I'm involved in updating and software revisions and plugin developments with current products. And a lot of that involves interacting with engineers, end users, and getting feedback on what they need and what they want, and prioritizing that and helping the company. Of course, they're a global company, so I'm speaking on behalf of the U.S. engineers or whatever, but and those needs are not always the same as Asia or Europe or things. But and it's a stunningly great job. I can't believe it. I love it. And it's the same thing like what we're doing. We talk about gear, and we talk about I just have to make some notes about it and send it to Japan. And it's like, oh, that's my job. That's what I was doing anyway. But was talking about gear and seeing what I liked and what I didn't like. But now and all this, I wrote reviews for years, and being able to evaluate things and compare things and all the ways I learned that from doing gear reviews works perfectly for this development. And I work primarily with the Rivage console, which is their flagship live console, which there's 4 different models: a PM10, a PM7, a PM5, and a PM3. And there has been all this integration, which was led by Chris Taylor with Rupert Neve Designs and Rupert Neve on the preamp design, on a lot of stuff in the console. Really? And it is the absolute closest you could come to mixing on a Neve console in a live environment. The sound is studio quality, as good as any Neve design that's ever been out there, but yet it is a digital, fully recallable live console. And it is, and it came out, Yamaha went a long time without having a flagship console, and then it was released, and so they started with a pretty small market share, but then it's just been great to see all these bands start to move to it. I mean, from Ariana Grande, Garth Brooks, Kings of Leon, Foo Fighters, Elton John, Steely Dan, Paul Simon. I mean, it is just crazy, and more all the time, because these guys get on it, and it's like, wow, they recognize that this sounds like what I got, what you hear when you work on a Neve console in the studio.
Yeah, cool. It's surprising historically, like we said in the past, how different those two worlds were, live and studio, how they're merging these days. And it is exciting. I think it excites me to do live sound myself, to have those tools.
And so a lot of these bands, because their setups are fairly complex, if they do a live recording, they want their live engineer to mix the studio recording or whatever, because it just makes sense. They know what it's supposed to sound like, and they truly understand all the intricate parts of if they're playing to tracks or the way the harmonies work or all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Some bands are really good studio bands and they need to sound that way live. And then other bands are just really good live performers and they need to sound that way in the studio, right? So the two worlds need to work together for sure.
And then there's added DAW integration too with the current consoles as well, that allow that to people to transfer from one side of things to the other too. I think is another interesting thing that's happened.
And of course, everybody's got preferences about DAWs and all that kind of thing, but Yamaha owns Steinberg as well, so there's a lot of great integration with Cubase and everything with the console. And I mean, it's like you have to load this extension in your computer, but if you've got the extension loaded, you just run a Cat5 cable between your computer and the Rivage console, and all of a sudden your Cubase or your new Windows session comes up, all the names are there, all the layout's the exact same, the colors are all the same as what you do on your console. So if somebody's recording the show and then they're going to mix it later, they've already got a comfort factor. I mean, which you can build that, but I mean, it's built for you automatically on the fly, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And this all kind of strips that part of it away too, where the difference between the DAWs is really a preference in navigation, right?
Yeah.
But how it looks and how you navigate through it, what you're comfortable with, what you're used to.
But it's not easy always to switch DAWs. I mean, there's some people, like I know a ton of Pro Tools users who are also Pro Tools haters and would love to move to something else, but it's like, yeah, I love it, but I can't learn something else. It's it's crazy because it becomes like playing a musical instrument, and you're so efficient on it and fast. It's a difficult decision to leave. A far bigger decision, I think, than to go from Mac to PC or vice versa. I mean, definitely. Changing DAWs is a big deal.
Yeah.
But
from ease of workflow and doing things quickly, like you said, I know how to edit this piece or change this in this DAW, but I'm in a new one and I have to figure it out. Yeah,
right. And it'll do it, but it's just a matter of you got to figure it out. And you don't know all the shortcuts. So even if you figure it out, you're probably going to do it a lot slower. Even though there's a fast way to do it, you just don't know that way yet.
You don't know it yet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And muscle memory too. You're used to a certain key command or whatever.
Yeah,
right.
Have Rupert Neve preamps live. That's incredible.
Yeah, and they're not to go talk too much about that, but they have transformer emulation. So it's a digital emulation of a transformer, and they have something called Silk, which is like on his hardware pieces with this Silk, where you can control second, third order harmonic distortion, which translate as being musical distortion. And that, so these studio guys who, when you go in the studio and work, it's nobody, even if you're at a great studio with a great console, rarely do you use the same preamp for everything. You're picking and choosing, and you maybe have a Neve console and you may use that on half the stuff, but man, you really like the way these API pre's sound on the toms. You like the graces on the piano and the overheads, and you love the GML on the vocal or whatever it is, but you're bouncing between a lot of different pre's, and between the Silk and the transformer emulation on the live sound on the Ravage console, you can fine tune those preamps to perfectly suit the sound source. So it doesn't sound like a bunch of the preamps that are the same. Every preamp is tuned specifically for that sound source. And it is, these studio guys freak out because they've never had that ability in the live world. And now all of a sudden mixing in the live arena feels like they have the same kind of creative control that they had when they were working in the studio before. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That sounds great. Wow. How has the last year and a half been for you? Someone who has their own studio in their backyard, it could be easily perceived that nothing changed. You were just perfectly positioned for this time.
Well, it's it's been a weird year and a half. I mean, it's because I'm doing Yamaha's what I'm doing more than anything else now, even though, and I mean, a lot of that I'm doing in my studio because it's a great place to listen, but I'm doing that as much as I'm mixing, and it's just, so it's been a weird time. Everything's kind of shut down, and I had a lot of projects still come my way, so I was able to do a lot of stuff, but there was no interaction. Nobody came by a single time, and most people don't come by that much anyway, but nobody came by, and it's felt pretty weird. It's been interesting to me how at the beginning of it everybody was excited about these online concerts and educational opportunities online and Zoom call, and that was all real exciting at first, and then it just took a few months before everybody's sick of that, and it's like, not another Zoom call or not another whatever, because we're burned out on it, and we realized
that's why we're calling it a podcast. Trying to
because I mean, it's
trying to get you interested.
It's I mean, we're talking gear. I'm fine to talk gear all the time. I just don't. But I was all like, I'm going to learn a foreign language. I'm going to learn Japanese. I'm flying over there a bunch. I'm gonna,
really,
and it's like that went really well for Duolingo for about month or something, and then it's like, golly, I got to do this 5 minutes every day. But anyway, so it's been a weird time, and it's been I've had a lot of friends who've had to really struggle financially, and that's made it tough too. And it feels better when everybody's positive, and it feels like we're working together. Plus all the not to be political, but the whole year and a half has been overly politicized too. And it's just I've seen friends that were close friends for long times hate each other now because of different views on things, and that's just made life tough. I'm ready to get back to some kind of normalcy.
Or families. On both sides of my family. I'm sure everybody has a story like that. On both sides of your family, it's kind of like split.
I don't
not
think
that people
anybody
don't talk to each other anymore. It's just it's different. And it shouldn't be that way.
No, it's sad.
Definitely.
Well, I think I'm not sure you were or not, but I had so I mentioned one of the things I try to do is interact with engineers and get their feedback on development things I can do with the console. So that since there's no concerts going on, I can't go see any shows or interact with people there. So I started a podcast, which I just ran last summer and into the fall a little bit. But it was called Front of the House Fridays, and the whole concept was during this COVID time, front of house takes on an entirely new meaning. And instead of talking to this engineer at the front of house mix position, I'm going to go sit in front of their house. We're going to socially distance, and I'm going to interview them in front of their house. So I brought over a laptop, and we set up in front of their house, and you can hear cars drive by. And it was and it was a blast, and everybody was so burnt on not having these conversations and stuff that it was great to and we talked about being on the road, talked about Dylan and being away from your family, we talked about mics, talked about, relationships with bands and artists and crew people. And I mean, it was just good banter about road life. And it was, and I think people really loved it.
Yeah. Where's that? We got to find that.
Front of the House Fridays, and you can find it on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or any of the places you find podcasts, and you could put a link to it up or something.
Yeah,
and
we will.
I talked with
we'll do that.
Joe Kaiser, who mixes Nickelback, Dan Hines, who mixes Garth Brooke, Rick May, who mixes Mercy Me, TC, who's Garth's monitor engineer, Bob Bashir, who does monitors for the Opry. I can't remember who all, but I mean, a lot of great Matt Herr, who mixes Elton John. But it was great. And if they were out of town, we did it like this, but we still went in. I went in my front of my house, and they went in their front house. And like Gary Brown, who mixes Fish, he's like, just so you know, I'm on a pretty busy street. And I'm like, oh, that's okay. And it's like, it was busy. There are cars driving by the whole time, but that's fine. It was part of the whole thing,
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'll have to check. We'll have to check that out.
Yeah, check that out.
Front of House
definitely
Fridays.
Check it out. Front of the House
Awesome.
Fridays.
Front of the House Fridays. All right.
Yeah, I'm a geek for that stuff too. I love that. And I got to listen to that because the monitor engineers sometimes have the best stories. Because they work directly with the band. Like the guy in front of house, there's thousands of people that's going to look at him if something goes wrong, and there's a lot of tension with that. But there's a different tension if the band looks at you and there's something wrong.
That's the the thing is, even if you screw up as front of house guy, the next day you got a whole new crowd and they don't know about it. If you're the monitor guy and you screw up, the next night you're mixing for the same people again and they're not happy.
Yeah.
So
and that will not happen again.
But Bob Bashir, we set up in front of his house, and he has a fire pit, and it was all great. And we're talking about 20 minutes in, and then it starts to rain, and we had to move onto his back porch. But I said, well, this is appropriate. It felt pretty weird interviewing a monitor engineer in front of his house. We needed to be behind the house anyway.
Yeah.
So so it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome. Fantastic. Russ, is there something else interesting, unexpected about you that people don't know? Tell us a bit about who Russ Long is outside of the audio world, your hobbies, interests, or activities.
Well, I continue, surprising enough, to be a music fan. I couldn't believe it, but I was going through my credit card bill a month ago, and there was some charge for, I think it was $1,200 or something like that. I'm like, what? Gaylord? What in the world did I buy from Gaylord Corporation for $1,200 or something? And then I got to looking, and it was like, oh, that's the Ryman's parent company, and that's because the Ryman's open for shows again, and I bought tickets for all these shows for the rest of the year, and it was like $1,200 I spent on tickets for the next 6 months for shows. But it's like my wife and I love to go see bands, and we bought a bunch of tickets. So we're going to see I don't know, tons of people. Jason Isbell being the one that I'm most excited about.
Oh, cool! Wow.
Yeah. Fantastic.
But a bunch of Ryman shows. So I'm a music fan. I love my family. I've got my oldest son lives up in Burlington where he goes to college, but my other two kids are here, that's crazy too, because sadly have some friends who don't necessarily love hanging with their family all the time, but I love hanging out with my kids, and I've been blessed. I mean, that's the one great thing that's come out of COVID is being able to spend more time with family, I think, which
that's true.
Which is
because you know what, they're your people,
Yeah,
they're your people.
So
they're the little yous walking around.
I'm a avid. Well, I would say I was an avid runner. That's morphed a little bit to walking over the last couple of years, just because the knees aren't as good anymore. And but I spent my whole life just liking. That's where I do my best thinking, and I love to listen to podcasts. So I do that, and when I'm out, and but I mean, I ran half a dozen marathons and tons of half marathons, 10Ks and 5Ks over the years, and now, like I said, it's mostly walking. Although I did run a 5K last Saturday that ended the Titans 5K that ended on Titans Stadium, which was
cool,
which was fun. But so that's something else. But I love to read, but I don't read near as much as I'd like because I just run out of I just am tired usually when I go to bed and can't stay awake any longer.
Yeah, I hear you. There's only so much time to do all that. So thanks for joining us today. I think we had a great conversation. We could keep on talking. Maybe we will. But at some point, Rob will have to stop the record button.
I have one question I need to ask, though. Hold on one second.
Go ahead.
People who are listening to this can't see this, but that's a cool shirt you have on there, Russ. What's on that shirt?
This is a
toucan,
toucans, I guess. I don't know. It's very cool. Kind of my happy shirt.
Nice. It's good to have a couple of those in the closet.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Most of my shirts are pretty happy.
Sorry, I've been staring at it, and I thought I got to ask. That's a cool shirt.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. All right, sorry.
You can find out more about Russ on his website, dangerland.ws, and also check out the article on sonicscoop.com where Russ talks about building his personal studio, his creative space, Dangerland. Check out the links we provide below for that. Russ, thanks for joining us today on Creative Spaces, and we appreciate your time talking to us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Thank you, Russ. Take care and stay safe and healthy.
Thanks again for listening to Creative Spaces. And before we go, please make sure you follow Creative Spaces on Twitter. Head over to Auralex.com where you'll find a ton of information about making the right choices when it comes to acoustical treatment and sound isolation for your creative space. You can also purchase Auralex products on our site and visit one of your favorite Auralex dealers.